Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to Trinity Episcopal Church. We're so glad that all of you are here. We really enjoy hosting these events. So I would like to introduce to you Roslyn, Landmark, Jamie Carbolia.
Thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Jamie Carbolia, Executive Director of the Roslyn Landmark Society, and I'd like to welcome you to our second lecture of our 2025 speaker series. Can everyone hear me? Okay. As many of you know, our organization was founded in 1961 by Dr. Roger and Gary during the time when the Roslyn area was facing intense development pressures. Since that time, close to 50 historic structures have been preserved and counting, and that's all thanks to all of you, our members and sponsors. So thank you again for being here today to enjoy this fantastic presentation we have planned for you. If you are not yet a member of our organization, I encourage you to check out our website at roslynlandmarks.org where you can become one. And now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Jerry and Rita Trapani are the owners of Shadberry Farm. Jerry is a retired master farrier with over 40 years of experience, and Rita is a retired art teacher and artist. They are lifelong members of the Carriage Association of America, the American Driving Society, the Four in Hand Club, and they are founding members of the Pominock Driving Club of Long Island. They have shown their horses in many disciplines and have also worked closely with the Long Island Museum of American Art, History, and Carriages in Stonebrook due to their lifetime of acquired knowledge and to their love of history. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jerry and Rita Trapani.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon. I just want to talk just briefly about how the two of us are dressed.
All right, I am fortunate to wear a pair of breeches that are at least 90 years old. One thing that anyone who rode horses knows that beside having a good, reliable, and safe horse, there are three other wonderful things that you can have. Stretch fabric, zippers, and Velcro, none of which are on me. This is a twill. This is what they had during then. Let's see if I can get this. And when you're on a horse, you need this extra area because you would pop right off your horse if you didn't have that extra room to take up the barrel of the horse when you're sitting on it. Now, these are about 90 years old, and they are a little bit short for me, but they are the real thing. The buttons are possibly Bakelite as well. So I have been very careful to secure them for a long time, and there are many buttons. Do not need to disrobe quickly in something like these. They do not have any stretch to them. And at 90 years old, we would come to breeches that now, this is a gentleman's breeches. This gentleman hunted with Smithtown Hunt, and he carried a zipper. But again, Velcro hadn't been invented yet, and it does take a while to really dress up properly for a show. I bought my first horse over 50 years ago, and this was the helmet. No padding, no chin strap, nothing. This is over 51 years. This one is over 30 years. Much different, lots of padding, but it is nowhere near the helmets that people who ride today have. They are even, every year you wind up getting a helmet that is improved. You still have the crown, you can hear it. Okay? You have a stock tie. This one is a modern stock tie. You attach it by Velcro on the back. But the stock ties in the past were approximately this long, and they were fastened in a knot and a pin in case your horse was injured or in case you were injured or someone injured, and it was very helpful. Everything on a rider and a horse is there for a reason, to keep you safe and make your ride comfortable. Thank you.
I'm dressed in what we would call stable livery or informal livery, and I would be dressed the way a groom would be dressed at a horse show. Again, I have boots and breeches on in case I was going to exercise my boss's horses. And before there was helmets like that, we had a derby that was hard. And that was our only head protection. And sometimes we would have a string that we would attach to the collar of our jacket so that if we fell off, the bowler wouldn't get lost. So without, and I wanted to mention that quilt that's there. That's a quilt that we had made from some of our ribbons that we acquired over the years with our horses. We competed in, when we first met each other, we competed in just trail riding and hunter and jumper shows, and then we got into dressage, and then eventing, 3-day eventing. We didn't do 3-day, but eventing, and then we got into driving and worked our way up to driving 4-in-hand and tandem. So all of those ribbons are from shows up and down the East Coast. So if you want to come up later and take a look at it, we can talk about that. So without further ado, I'll get going with this. And I was a farrier for 58 years. That's part of the reason why I walk the way I do. And we'll get started with this. Okay, if you wanted to race, hunt, play polo, or just ride horses around New York in the late 1800s, Long Island was the place to go. With its flat open spaces, beautiful seaside locations, not much forestation, a temperate climate, Long Island was the ideal place for equestrian sports of all kinds. First there was racing, then fox hunting, polo, and shows on Long Island became the playground of the rich and famous. The tradition continues today with celebrity polo matches and the Belmont Stakes and the Hampton Classic drawing thousands of people from around the world. The lower right, that's Secretariat winning the Belmont Stakes in 1973 by 31 lengths. And his record still stands, and no other horse has done that. And the other photo shows people what we would call tailgating today at a show in the or a polo match. Looks like a polo match in the 1930s. Today, the city of New York lays claim to a single race course, Aqueduct, and not for too much longer, because once the new Belmont is done, they're going to close Aqueduct for racing, and it's just going to be available for training the horses, and they're going to expand the casino. But at one time in New York City had as many as 7 race courses, and it all started in Brooklyn. Brooklyn and Queens, as much as people argue about it, it is part of Long Island. And before New York City was incorporated, they were separate cities. We'll look back at the golden age of racing in the Big Apple with a review of some of the race courses in the turn of the century. And trotting races were very popular also. First they raced under saddle, and then later on with sulkies and light carriages. Standardbreds came after the Civil War, but before that any breed could be raced. Thoroughbred racing in New York City dates back to 1665 when Governor Richard Nicolls Nichols built a large oval turf course in the open flatlands of Long Island known as the Hempstead Plain. Not only was it a regular race course laid out, but he christened it Newmarket after the famous race course in Great Britain. For more than a century, New York society, from gentry to farmers, flocked there, and it gave way to many imitators. For many years, racing in the city was ad hoc, meaning that it was a localized pastime done on quiet roads and open fields. The Civil War turned the sport upside down. While the bitter conflict caused racing's collapse in the southern states, the North became a flourishing industry, regional, even national in its scope, and the center of it was New York City. Fundamental to this was two factors: the emergence of a new breed of tremendously rich capitalists and a heightened appetite for pleasure and entertainment in the aftermath of the ordeal of war. Into this stepped millionaires such as Belmont, D.D. Withers, and others who poured vast sums of money into top-class stables and a spate of race courses. The Union and Centerville trotting courses were early trotting courses, like I said, were under saddle first. In the Woodhaven section of Queens was one of the most famous, called the Union Course. And then further south, near where Aqueduct is today, was the Centerville Course. There was a trotting course. Centerville was formed in 1825, and the Union Course was built after that. The Union Course was the site of the first skin or dirt racing surface and groomed surface. The courses were originally without grandstands, and the custom of conducting a single 4-mile race consisted of many heats to determine who the winner was, gave way to programs consisting of several races and match races between horses from the south and from the north, drew crowds as high as 70,000. Several hotels cropped up around these race courses, including the Snedeker Hotel, which the Snedeker family were Dutch immigrants, and they kind of got into the entertainment business, hospitality business, and they, as things kept moving east, they moved east with it. And we're lucky enough to know a direct descendant of the Snedeker family, and he's helped us a lot with all of this. By the time of Morris Park's closure in the Bronx, racing in the city had transferred to Brooklyn. The first of Brooklyn's 3 tracks, Brighton Beach, was opened in 1879. From the outset, it was conceived to attract crowds and reap a profit. It was built on several hundred acres of oceanfront property in Coney Island, which was named after the famous British seaside town of Brighton, and set to transforming it into a resort for New York crowds. Not content with building only a pier and a bathing pavilion, Brighton Beach needed its own race course. In a little more than a month, some 500 laborers working day and night created the track. And Brighton's track opened in 1879 with 2 grandstands capable of accommodating 13,000 racegoers. It overlooked a mile-long track. Sheepshead Bay boasted a steeplechase track, a training track, saddle and paddock, judges' stand, and a betting ring, similar to the tracks in England. In 1886, it also included a turf course. Sheepshead Bay was immediately successful. It drew the finest horsemen and horses, as well as high society and high bettors, and hosted 2 of the greatest fixtures of the era, the Suburban Handicap and the Futurity. New York's appetite for racing still was not fulfilled. In 1886, the Brooklyn Jockey Club began racing at the old Prospect Park trotting grounds in Gravesend. The Gravesend track opened in 1886. Its physical environment couldn't compete with the others, but it ran races like the Preakness and the Brooklyn Handicap. And later on, the Preakness moved to Pimlico Racetrack in Maryland. This is what the old racetracks looked like. And you can see there was no starting gates back then. The horses just came up to what they called a wire, and then they would raise the wire and start the races. The Brighton race course had a magnificent grandstand, almost looked like a castle. And the center photograph shows Alfred Vanderbilt leaving after the Brooklyn Handicap with his famous road coach, the Viking, and his famous gray horses. And Alfred Vanderbilt was later lost on the sinking of the Lusitania. Prospect Park in Brooklyn was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Bow, the same landscape architects who designed Central Park in 1858. Like the former, Prospect Park began in 1866 and was meant to accommodate horses with bridle paths and carriage drives. In 1919, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle described plans for a new Bedford Riding Academy as a gorgeous affair. It'll have frontage of almost 100 feet and fitted with an observation balconies, tea parlors, and various other requisites as a gathering place for society. It was also conveniently located with direct access to the bridle path to Coney Island. Anybody who's familiar with Brooklyn knows that Ocean Parkway runs from Prospect Park to Coney Island, and that was originally designed to be a bridle path and carriage path, so that people could ride or drive their horses from the center of Brooklyn and Prospect Park to the beaches in Coney Island. And there's only one stable left today. That's called Kensington Stable. The old stable is repurposed as a warehouse, but you can still go riding in Prospect Park out of Kensington at 51 Caton Place. Rita and I went there several years ago to judge a horse show that they had there. Racing moves to Queens at Aqueduct in Jamaica. You could argue that Aqueduct had two birthdays, not one. Originally opened in 1894, the original track was a utilitarian kind of place, then reimagined in 1959. And then in 1981, they added the all-weather grandstand, and again in 2011, they added the casino. And as I said, that's going to be closing for racing when Belmont reopens, hopefully in 2026. Jamaica opened in 1903, a day that featured the inaugural running of the Excelsior Handicap. Eugene Wood was one of the founders and the largest stockholder, served as its first president. Upon his death in 1924, the Wood Memorial Stakes was named in his honor, and it's still run yearly at Belmont. Jamaica closed in 1955 when Robert Moses took the land for housing and highway development. Jamaica Racetrack was in the approximate area of where Rockaway Boulevard and the Van Wyck Expressway are today. And that Robert Moses took all of that land and he put public housing in and put the Van Wyck Expressway. Two features of the old Belmont Park remain today, in the Belmont Park that they're rebuilding. First, the display of the four stone pillars on Hempstead Turnpike, and they were a gift from the mayor of Charleston, South Carolina. And they came from the old Washington course in Charleston. And the stone pillars are now found at the clubhouse entrance. Hopefully they're going to keep them there. Lesser known but more visible to the racing public is the the iron railing surrounding the walking ring. The railings were used for old decorations from the south side of the Belmont Grandstand, and they were salvaged during the 1963 demolition. Not only was Belmont unprecedented in size at the time, but also it had a new innovation of the Long Island Railroad running an extension right to the racetrack. Originally, the station was on the south side of Hempstead Turnpike, then later it was moved to where it is now on the north side, and right next to where the new USB Arena is. And near the railroad terminal is yet another track called the Belmont Park, and that's where the steeplechase used to be. But that's used to bring in the old days before they had horse vans, they would ship the horses by rail. And that's what the old Belmont looked like and some of the crowds that were there. Today, 2 displays in the clubhouse of the current Belmont Park commemorate the history of the racetrack. The long mural by Pierre Belloc featuring the dominant jockeys, trainer, and racing personalities of the track's history, and a series of paintings of old Belmont Park that are featured in a nearby restaurant. Well, Rita and we participated in the Belmont Horse Fair in the late 1980s, and Rita had done a painting of a carousel horse, and the people at Belmont saw it and wanted to purchase it, but Rita let them take a photograph of it, and it was put at the entrance to the Terrace Garden restaurant in the clubhouse, and it stayed there until they tore down the thing, so hopefully they'll put it back up there again. And it was also on the menus, and it was so popular that they had to stop putting it on the menus because people would steal the menus all the time. And Belmont is famous for the last race of the American Triple Crown, and it's a very difficult thing for horses to win. And there's an old postcard from the 1950s, the Secretariat again, and that's a photograph from our carriage during the Belmont Fair, seeing what the grandstand looked like. That's from the grandstand side, and then the clubhouse is at the far end. You may not know it, but there were 17 stables around Forest Park at one time. And it's not surprising given that people commonly owned a lot of horses in that area in the early 20th century. The old Forest Hills Riding and Driving Club later became Parkside Riding Academy, and in the 1930s used to organize a Sunday morning breakfast drive down Continental Avenue to the Forest Hills Garden Inn at the train station. They would ride their horses to the inn, have brunch there, and the grooms would stand outside with the horses, and then later on they would get on the horses and ride them back again. Or sometimes their chauffeurs would pick them up and the grooms would ride the horses back. And if you're ever in that area, across from where the Home Depot is now, you'll see a sign that's called Trotting Course Lane. And that's because that's near where the Union Course was. And so there was a lot of training stables in the area. And stories vary as to why the thoroughfare was originally called Trotting Course Lane, but the theory is that it was the main route between the stables and the Union Course. There were also stables in Cunningham, Alley Pond, Casina, and Creedmoor Park. I started my equestrian career at Parkside in Forest Park and Dixie Dew Stables in 1962. There's only one stable left there now, and that's Parkside, but it's not called Parkside anymore. It's now part of Mayor Bloomberg's initiative for handicapped riders called Gallop New York, and they took that over, and there's a There's the Forest Hills Garden Inn, and there's a young Jerry with hair and no mustache in the middle with my first winner. Hempstead Lake State Park. The current stable on Eagle Avenue dates back to 1926. And shortly after the deal was announced to develop Hempstead Lake into a state park, John Welbeck opened the Paramount Riding Academy. In the 1930s, he sold it to Charles Heinzen, who later renamed it Lakeside Riding Academy. And the name survived until just a few years ago, and it ran for a number of decades. Today, the New York, it's called the New York Equestrian Center, has been totally renovated with an indoor arena, new stalls and stables, but you can still rent a horse and ride around Hempstead Lake State Park. It was one of a half a dozen riding academies around the lake at that time, and Peninsula Boulevard was called Mill Road. And to encourage the new park, there was postcards you can see there, and there's a sign from the Hempstead Riding Academy, and it was $1.50 to rent a horse for an hour back then. Now it's on average between $100 and $150 to rent a horse, sometimes more. The Green Tree Estate is a 400-acre property purchased in 1904 by Payne Whitney for his bride. Later, John J. Whitney occupied the main house, where Mrs. Whitney remained until her death in 1998. Mrs. Whitney was called the Queen of Saratoga because they also, were famous with Green Tree Stables was one of the most famous racing stables, and they had a place in Saratoga as well. And the Gormley brothers had a stable on the what's now the North Service Road of the expressway between Community Drive and Lakeville Road, and you could rent a horse there and ride through the Green Tree Estate until about 1980. And we once owned a carriage that was owned by the Green Tree Farm. Ambrose Clark and Broad Hollow Farm, the 600-acre horseman and singer-sewing machine heir. F. Ambrose Clark was one of the most magnificent properties in Old Westbury. In the 1920s, the Duke of Windsor was entertained there, and the Clark family, after Ambrose's death, sold the estate to New York State, and that's currently the State SUNY Old Westbury. While repairing the roof on the 40-room mansion, a fire started and it was destroyed, but the stable remains, and that's part of the Horseability stables now. And you can see some photographs of Ambrose riding, and then he was also a good whip or carriage driver, driving his four-in-hand in New York. And his carriage, that coach, is now owned by a friend of ours in Maryland. And that's what a picture of the stable looks like today. And it's been cleaned up and partially renovated. A half-mile dirt oval at the Mineola Fairgrounds was originally opened in 1866, and the fair hosted harness racing, a large horse show until the 1930s. The first car race on Long Island was held in 1922. Well, not the first car race, because the Vanderbilt races were before that, but the first oval racing. And then later on, midget racing from the 1930s to the 1940s. The track was closed to racing in 1949 and demolished in 1951 to make way for the Nassau County Courthouse complex. That's where Mineola and Old Country Road are and come together. But it was a real show place, and again, you could see postcards with the racing and the beautiful grounds and everything, and a young lady riding her horse there on the grounds. And it's also, that's where the Long Island Fair was hosted. It was originally called the Nassau County Fair, but then they changed the name to the Long Island Fair, and that's the longest continuously running fair in in New York State. Roosevelt Raceway was a harness track located just outside the village of Westbury. Initially created as a venue for the 1936 Vanderbilt Cup auto race, it was converted to a half-mile harness racing facility. The harness racing facility operated from 1940 until 1988, and it was the original home of the Messenger Stakes, part of the Triple Crown for Pacers. The raceway hosted many other events besides auto racing and harness racing. They had concerts there, and then later on, many of you might remember the flea market. It was also the first track to use a mobile starting gate and have racing under the lights. The upper photograph of the starting gate looks at about a 1940s era Packard, and then the lower one is a later model Cadillac. And they had rock concerts there and all kinds of things until they closed, unfortunately. The Piping Rock Club in Locust Valley hosted horse shows and polo matches. And in October of 1937, Cole Porter had a riding accident there and it crushed one of his legs, leading to one of them being amputated years later. And it was the Hamptons of the state, and boasted several members like J.P. Morgan, Benjamin Strong, Percy Chubb, Comfort Tiffany, and many others. Nelson Doubleday, the Pratt family, and Averill Harriman, who later on became New York governor. Payne Whitney and Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt and Vincent Asser. Now, Jackie Onassis and her mother competed there as part of the summer circus of horses. They were shipped to the train station from wintering in Aiken or Southern Pines down south, and then would spend the summer at Piping Rock Club and do a series of horse shows. And the center photograph is a young Jacqueline Bouvier competing there. And you can see a group of ladies. Some of them have skirts on because they're riding side saddle, and the other lady has boots and breeches on because she's riding astride. And you can see how they moved the horses by train back then. Locust Valley was also the home of Messenger, and he was one of the most famous stallions ever to be brought to America. Not only was he a great flat racing horse, he was also a fantastic harness racing horse. And he was one of the founding stallions of the American standardbred after the Civil. A lot of his, even though he was long gone, a lot of his prodigy went on to compete in harness racing. And there's a boulder with a plaque on the corner of Duck Pond Road and Piping Rock Road where he's buried. The history of Long Island polo is a fascinating one. It began in 1879 when several members of the Meadowbrook Hunt Club, including Thomas Hitchcock, Alamo Bird, Orlis Belmont, and others, started to play in the infield of the racetrack at the Mineola Fairgrounds. The club was formally incorporated in 1881, and the first official polo field was built in 1884. From 1923 to 1953, it's called the Golden Age of Polo on Long Island, and drew as many as 45,000 spectators. And the 1928 Cup of the Americas, the United States versus Argentina, drew over 100,000 people. Today, the Meadowbrook Polo Club is still in existence, and they have 3 fields on Long Island today. 50 Whitney Lane in Old Westbury, Comset, there's a field at Comset Park in Lloyd Neck that was originally the Marshall Field Estate. We'll talk about a little later, and there's one at Bethpage Park. And they still play at all three of these fields, and in the winter time, they play arena polo indoors. And during the summer months, from May till late September, you can see very high-quality polo at Bethpage Park. It's open to the public, and it's very reasonable to watch. And if you've never seen a polo game, it's really great. The Meadowbrook Hunt Club originated in 1881 in Westbury, and then later moved to where it is now in Jericho. But there's no more horses there anymore. But the Meadowbrook Hunt hunted from the Queens border to the Suffolk border, and in other parts of Nassau County. And today it's a golf and tennis club, and future President Theodore Roosevelt was a member of the Hunt Club, and his home, Sagamore Hill, hosted the hunt several times. In fox hunting, you know, what's called getting your colors, that's when you get to wear a scarlet or what they call a pink coat. And it's called a pink coat because there was a tailor named Pink in England who developed the very heavy woolen coat, and so people sometimes call it a pink coat. And on the collar of the coat, each hunt has a particular color that will identify if you have joint meets, you know who belongs with which hunt. And the Meadowbrook Hunt Club, their color was a robin's egg blue, similar to the background of the slide here. And that's one of Rita's paintings in the corner of hunting on Long Island when we were hunting. I said several times there were no trucks or trailers back in those days, so the horses were what we called hacked or driven to the meets or the shows. And one way to get to the hunt was what we call a sporting tandem. And that's where the leader, the horse out in the front, was saddled with the owner's, you know, saddle that he was going to use, and just an open riding bridle. And the groom and the rider would drive the two horses. The leader would be fresh when they got to the hunt because he really didn't have to pull the carriage very much. So while the owner was participating in the hunt, the groom would then cool out the horse that we call the wheeler who pulled the carriage. He would have another saddle in the carriage, have that one ready, and when the owner came around again, they would switch horses, and then at the end of the day, they would go home. And some people, sometimes ladies, didn't want to fox hunt, but they wanted to follow it, so they called that hilltopping. And people still hilltop today, but they do it with ATVs or four-wheel drives. But there was a type of cart developed on Long Island, and it generically got the name the Meadowbrook cart. And it was a rear entry type of cart, had very large wheels, had extra springing on the shafts so that it would be very stable over uneven ground and going through creeks and things like that. And that's what a Meadowbrook cart would look like. And that was kind of like the ATV of its time. The Smithtown Hunt was organized in 1900 and recognized by the Master of Foxhounds Association in 1906. Smithtown is now the only hunt still surviving on Long Island. For many years they hunted both live and drag, but recently have become an exclusively drag hunt. That means that the scent is laid on a specific path for the hounds to follow, and then the riders would then follow the hounds. And they maintain a pack of crossbred hounds, meaning English and American hounds. And today they host several a hunter pay series and a horse show every summer around Long Island, and that's open to all. You don't have to be a member. And their colors is a shade of purple, similar to what you see here. Their longtime master was Doc Fredericks. He was a veterinarian from Northport, and he hunted with them for over 60 years, and along with legendary horseman Harry DeLayer. And we'll talk about Harry in a little bit. That's Doc Fredericks in the upper right. In the near-mythical story of Harry DeLayer and Snowman, the plot goes something like this. A poor Dutch immigrant rises to American show jumping superstardom with an $80 ex-plow horse that he saved on a whim from a slaughter auction in Pennsylvania. Together, Harry and Snowman went on to fame and fortune, winning the most acclaimed show jumping titles of their day. They competed from the late 50s through the mid 1960s. And his daughter Harriet said, I think the first year was 1958 when Dad won the Triple Crown of the jumping world. The professional horseman, champion, horse of the year, and champion at Madison Square Garden Horse Show. Snowman was such a special horse that the kids could all ride him and take him swimming in the Long Island Sound behind Knox School, where Harry was the riding master in Nessaquah. And that's a photo of all the DeLayer kids on Snowman taking him out, and then some of the crazy things Harry did, like jumping over other horses, jumping over cars. They made a couple of movies and documentaries about him, if you can catch one. And there's talk about making another movie. He was a real character. He only passed away a couple of years ago. Harry did, Snowman. And Snowman is buried at the family farm. The Thomas School of Horsemanship was started in 1943 in Westbury, and then later moved to Melville in 1954 and stayed there until very recently, over 70 years. And it provided a thriving summer camp and riding academy that was attended by families all throughout New York and Long Island. They hosted a thing called the Junior Olympics, and it was one of the most popular stables on Long Island, and many famous equestrians got their start there. Sadly, it was recently sold for development, and there's going to be all houses there, and that's Mr. and Mrs. Thomas on their horses in Westbury, and that was what the old gates looked like in Westbury. In 1931, 1,368 acres transecting Nassau and Suffolk border were purchased by the New York State Parks Commission. And a stable was quickly opened there on Round Swamp Road, and it was run by the Scanlon family. The polo field was built in 1934, and has seen both high and medium gold polo there, and it's still available. The public stable that you see here was torn down. The remnants, there's no remnants of the stable, but the Scanlon house is where the park superintendent lives. And that's a picture of me shoeing a horse at the Bethpage Stables in the early 1970s. And the young lady sitting there, we're still friends with her, and she gave me that picture and asked, "Who's that guy shoeing my horse?" And I could tell by the head that it was me. At the age of 28, Marshall Field III was heir to the Marshall Field department store in Chicago, and he was one of the richest people in the world and sought the life of an English gentleman here in the United States. In 1921, he found land to create his elegant lifestyle and called it Comset. With the help of the Olmsted brothers and architect John Russell Pope, the tract of land was transformed into the Gold Coast's most elegant estates, complete with a dairy barn, dairy farm, polo field, and one of the most splendid stables. The stable was used in the 1981 movie Arthur. And a little trivia, during World War II, the government was looking for any brass that they could find to make ammunition. And so a lot of the estates painted the brass in their stables with black paint and said that it was cast iron. And in the early 1970s, when John Russo, when they took over the running of the stable to make it a public stable, he started stripping, cleaning the stable and found all the brass underneath there. So luckily that was saved. And that's what the stable looks like, the upper right picture. And August Belmont, and his farm was called the Nursery in Babylon. He was the founder of Belmont Racetrack, of course, and his sons Perry and August II were also great horsemen. His property now is where Belmont Avenue and the Southern State Parkway intersect, and it's the headquarters for the Long Island State Park Commission. Man of War was born there in 1917, and you can see how he got his name, because we were right in the middle of World War I at that time. And there was a mile-long track there. He dammed up the Little Carls River and made Belmont Lake. And there's still a stable on Peconic Avenue. Harry Hollins was a banker and stockbroker for J.P. Morgan, the Vanderbilts, and many other successful people at the turn of the century. And he became very successful himself and created the 600-acre meadow farm in East Islip. And he wrote a book called Happy Hunting Ground about the Southside Sportsman's Club that's now Connecticut State Park. His daughter Marion was one of the most well-known equestrians of the time. She never married, and she was one of the first women to learn to drive a four-in-hand of horses, learned to play polo, didn't ride side saddle, rode astride, fox hunted, and she was the first woman to get a polo handicap. And there was also a book written about her called Champion in a Man's World. After she stopped her equestrian endeavors, she moved to California, took up golf and tennis, became a tennis champion, and started the Ladies PGA, and developed the Pebble Beach golf course and the surrounding community around there. She was an amazing woman. I wish they'd make a movie about her life. And when Alfred Vanderbilt died on the Lusitania, she took his coach, the Viking, and his horses and drove. She was so famous at that time, she drove from Buffalo, New York to New York City and raised over $450,000 at that time, which was several million today. That's how famous she was. George Taylor assembled a large 1,500-acre tract and was an unusual and eccentric man of considerable means. In 1886, he built a large and ornate country home that's now Hexter State Park in East Islip. There he erected over 30 buildings, such as a carriage barn, stables, dairy barns, etc. Because most of the estates back then were self-sustaining. And the wooded areas of the estate he stocked with deer and game birds. And there was a public stable there where you could rent a horse until the late 1970s. And that's a picture of Marion on a polo pony. And that's her driving the Vanderbilt's coach coming into New York. That's a cover of the book. The Southside Sportsman's Club later became Connecticut State Park, and it's got some of the premier riding stables, and it's the largest park on Long Island. And this historic photo from 1887 to 89 shows many of the Southside members who were also coaching club members. And that's the coaching club's coach, the Tally Ho. And of course, they all didn't ride on the coach. The Southside Club was started in 1866, and it became Connecticut Park in 1973. And that's what the clubhouse looks like. Bayard Cutting and his brother bought property from the Lorillard brothers. The Lorillard name might be familiar to you if you ever smoked, because they were the tobacco kings back in the day. And the Lorillard brothers had a successful horse breeding farm on the west bank of the Connecticut River. And the manor house was built with many gables and chimneys and very ornate woodwork created by local artisans. The grounds were designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, and their stable was located on the banks of the river. And the stable is still there. That's what it looks like, the upper right, and there's the house. And then William K. Vanderbilt built Idle Hour, originally completed in 1879 for his first wife, Alba. It overlooked the Connecticut River opposite Westbrook, and they built a 60-room villa entirely of poplar and pine, and it took a year to build at a cost of $150,000 back then, $406 million today. It was entirely lost to fire in 1899 and replaced by the Richard H. Hunt Boart's mansion that exists today, that was most recently Dowling College. Unfortunately, it's falling into disrepair, but it was one of the most beautiful, impressive estates at the time. The horse stables burned down in the 1960s, but the coach house and the mansion still remain. The coach house was used as the gymnasium and community student center when it was Dowling College. The Bayshore Horse Show was held at Oakwood Park in the vicinity of where the Home Depot on Sunrise Highway in Bayshore is today. From the 1800s through World War I, the best shows and horsemen showed there over fences and with their fine carriages. Many estates were on the South Shore, and having a major show nearby was very advantageous. There were also showgrounds in Babylon, and there were no trucks or trailers, so the horses were hacked or driven back and forth to the shows. And that's what the grandstand looked like. There's another picture of Alfred Vanderbilt with the Viking and the Greys. And the other photograph of the gentleman who's driving is his brother Reginald. It was such a well-known show that it was in all the gossip magazines and the pictures of the time. And people would follow them like the celebrities today. The North Shore Showgrounds, which is called Oldfield Farm today, Ward Melville, who bought all the property in Stony Brook and developed the Stony Brook Village and that area, was also a great horseman, and he developed the North Shore Showgrounds in 1931. And it was a unique equestrian facility because it was surrounded by water. It was on a little peninsula jutting out into the Sound. And the stable complex composed of a main barn, a courtyard of stables, an outside hunt course, and a large wooden grandstand. And it was designed in the colonial revival style. It's now Suffolk County Parkland. Dr. Sally Lynch and her 501c have restored the property and host horse shows there in the summer. If you get a chance to go to their website and you want to see some, relive some history and see some great horse shows, that's a great place to go in the summer. Founded in 1904 by Mary Alex Knox, the Knox School began in an all-girls school in Briarcliff Manor. Harry DeLeo was the riding master and discovered snowman while he was there in the late 1940s and 50s. The unique round stable was built in the 1920s and features a covered exercise arena. The stable is still there, and you can see the overhead view, how all the stalls surround the covered exercise arena, and then the brick house that you see in the front was where the riding master would live. And there's still horses there. It's a private school, and it's a great place to visit up in Nessaquag. In the Hamptons each summer, horses and riding enjoy unprecedented popularity. Since its revival in 1971, the Southampton Horse Show held at Toppings Riding Club, and the growth of its successor, the Hampton Classic in the area, has seen the return of the equestrian tradition dating back to the turn of the century. First organized in the early 1900s, the annual horse show in Southampton took place on the sprawling open fields overlooking Lake Agawam. With the outbreak of World War I, the show was discontinued, to be revived again in the Roaring '20s. During the next decade, riding in the horse show flourished in the Hamptons, with a group of enthusiasts, including the Southampton Riding and Hunt Club in 1922. When it opened in 1928, the club was a showplace for the entire eastern seaboard. In 1977, they moved the show to Dune Alpine Farm, and it became the Hampton Classic. Again, we see young Jacqueline Bouvier competing in a horse show there. That's her mother in the center riding side saddle. And that's what some of the jumps look like, a lot different than what they jump over today. You and your horse had to be very brave back in those days. Finally, we're at the eastern terminus of Long Island, and there's Deep Hollow Ranch in Montauk. In 1658, the first home on the range was Montauk's Deep Hollow Ranch. And it was originally was a cattle ranch, and they call it the original home on the range and the birthplace of the American cowboy. At its peak of the ranching area, it was serious business for 275 years. As many as 6,000 head of cattle and sheep roamed the land between the beginning of May and the start of November. Because it was surrounded by water, there was no need for a lot of fencing, and so it was very good. Today, it's still an operating ranch. From the 1930s to the 1950s, they hosted rodeos out there, and it was a dude ranch open to the public. And you can see there's a guy riding Roman jumping over a jalopy at the rodeo, and that's what a brochure looked like of the ranch back in before World War I. And Long Island also spawned many Olympians, and next few such slides will quickly go through some of them. J. Michael Plum was born in Islip and grew up in Syosset. His father, Charles, was a steeplechase rider and huntsman for the Meadowbrook Hounds. And his mother was also an equestrian. Plum, until this last Olympics, held the record for the competing in the most Olympics over a period of time. And he competed in one of the most grueling equestrian events, the 3-day event. And he won many times, many gold medals, led the team to wins in the Pan American Games, and even competed to when they started having the Rolex Kentucky 3-day event, and competed all around the world. Tad Coffin grew up on Long Island during the 60s and early 70s. He started riding at age 10 at the family farm in Nassau County and riding with the Meadowbrook Hounds Pony Club. You'll see a lot of mention of that because that Meadowbrook Hounds Pony Club was the jumping off ground for many of these Olympic riders, and they got the best construction and horses to ride there. He started out in equestrian and junior hunters and jumpers, but then later turned to three-day eventing. His mare Ballycore won the individual gold medal at the Pan Am Games in Mexico in 1975, and then repeated their win at the Montreal Olympics in 1976. And Rita and I were there to see that happen, and that was very exciting. I was right outside of Montreal. Don Sacchi grew up in the horse industry and was the son of the owners of Cherry Meadow Farm on Pulaski Road in East Northport. And they had a riding school there that they ran. And he was also a member of the Meadowbrook Hounds Pony Club. And he went on to represent the United States in a number of Olympics and international competitions. Neil Shapiro was a member of the United States Equestrian team for over 12 years. Twice he won the Grand Prix of Aachen in Germany, and the world's most prestigious show jumping competition. He took up riding at age 5 and started riding at shows around 1956 at 11. Shapiro was largely self-taught in his early days at his small family farm in Old Brookville. At 15, he showed Music Man at Madison Square Garden in 1960. He later trained standardbreds at Roosevelt Raceway, and then later moved to New Jersey. He returned to jumping and still teaches clinics at his farm in New Jersey. Debbie Dolan Sweeney is the daughter of billionaire Cablevision founder Charles Dolan, and she's the director of Cablevision and Madison Square Garden Company. She grew up in Oyster Bay and learned to ride with the Meadowbrook Hounds Pony Club. She's in the Jumper Hall of Fame, and when she got married, Rita and I took her from the church to the family home in Oyster Bay Cove in our carriage, and that was an adventure. Bernie Trorig grew up in Syosset. As a horseman, Bernie started riding at the Thomas School, and as a competitor, he represented the United States both at home and abroad on many occasions, and he reached the top of the sport in all 3 international disciplines: show jumping, dressage, and eventing. That's, a really tough thing to do. In 1909, he was inducted into the National Show Hunter Hall of Fame, and the picture in the far right is William Steinkraus, who was a big name in show jumping in the 1950s, giving a 14-year-old Bernie his trophy from the Junior Olympics. Without great local blacksmiths and farriers, these great horsemen of the past couldn't do what they did. Today's farriers travel to the barns in a truck like you see on the lower right there. That was what one of my trucks looked like, and we had everything all on the truck, and we would go to the barns and shoe the horses. But back in the day, the horses had to be brought to the blacksmith shop, or on the larger estates, they had a shop right on the property if they had many horses and many estates. But the early blacksmiths also, besides shoeing horses, they repaired wagons, and later on, many of them became the local mechanics. As horses and carriages were used less and less, because they were very mechanically inclined, they learned to fix the newfangled automobile. And thanks to the internet, Facebook, and local historical societies, and things like this gentleman who's giving me some more information after the thing, that's how we put all of this stuff together. So I hope you enjoyed this look behind to equestrian history all over the world. And I hope I didn't put you all to sleep.